The rejection wasn't supposed to hurt this much. One moment, Emily Carter was standing before her fated mate in the great stone hall of Ravenspire Pack. The next, she was watching her entire world collapse with a single sentence. They expected her to break, to crumble like ash beneath the weight of his words. But they didn't know what was sleeping beneath her skin. They didn't know that the man who had just destroyed her, in front of hundreds, would be on his knees before her, before the torches burned out. The great stone hall wasn't built for comfort. It was built to remind you of your place. Towering arches of carved granite stretched toward the vaulted ceiling, their surfaces etched with the names of alphas long dead. Torchlight flickered against ancient banners that hung like ghosts from iron chains, each one bearing the silver wolf crest of Ravenspire. The air smelled of pine smoke, polished steel from the warrior's armor, and something sharper. The metallic tang of fear, disguised as anticipation. Two perfect lines of armored guards stood at attention along the ceremonial aisle, their faces expressionless masks. This was where legends were made and futures were decided, where mates were claimed beneath the watchful gaze of the moon goddess herself. Emily adjusted the jeweled neckline of her deep teal gown, her fingers trembling despite her efforts to appear calm. The dress had been a gift from Marcus, back when he still whispered promises in the dark, back when he looked at her like she was his entire world, instead of a political inconvenience. At 24, Emily had learned to make herself small, quiet, agreeable. It was how you survived as the daughter of a fallen beta family, especially when the Pack's new alpha had chosen you as his mate in secret, but refused to claim you in public. Emily Carter, a voice boomed from the dais. She lifted her chin, her heart fracturing with each step forward. Alpha Marcus Hale stood near the center of the hall, his dark silver armor catching the firelight. He was everything an alpha should be. Tall, commanding, dangerous. His jaw was set in that familiar hard line, the one he wore during council meetings when alliances were discussed and marriages were arranged like business transactions. He had loved her once. She was certain of it. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe and like button and tell me which city you're tuning in from. I love to know where this story found you. Now let's return to the moment everything changed. The crowd, council members, high-ranking wolves, visiting dignitaries, watched with eager eyes. They expected a bonding ceremony, a public declaration that would unite bloodlines and strengthen the Pack's position against rival territories. Marcus knelt, but the gesture held no warmth. His hand pressed to his chest in the traditional pose of acceptance, but his eyes were cold as winter stone. Emily's wolf stirred uneasily in the back of her mind, a low whine of warning. Something was wrong. "Emily Carter," Marcus said again, his voice echoing through the hall with alpha command. "By the authority granted to me as alpha of the Ravenspire Pack, and witnessed by the moon goddess herself." Emily felt the words coming before he spoke them, felt them like a blade hovering over her throat. "I reject you as my mate." The silence that followed was absolute. Then the gasps came, sharp intakes of breath rippling through the gathered wolves like a shockwave. Emily felt the bond between them, that sacred golden thread she'd felt since the moment their eyes first met, snap violently inside her chest. Pain exploded through her veins, white-hot and devastating. Her knees threatened to buckle, but she locked them, refusing to fall. Marcus rose to his full height, looking down at her with something that might have been regret if it weren't buried so deep beneath cold resolve. "You are unfit to stand beside me," he said, each word carefully chosen, deliberately cruel. You bring no alliances, no strength, no advantage to this pack. You are no Luna of mine." The hall held its breath. Emily did not scream, did not beg, did not give them the spectacle they expected. She simply stood there as the pain hollowed her out from the inside, as years of whispered affection and midnight promises turned to ash in her mouth. 2 guards stepped forward. "I'll walk," Emily said quietly, her voice steady despite the inferno raging inside her. She turned, and with her spine straight and her head high, began the long walk down the aisle. Each step felt like broken glass beneath her skin. She felt their stares, some pitying, some satisfied, others simply relieved it wasn't them standing in her place. But none of them noticed the shift in the air. None of them saw the torches flicker. None of them felt the ancient power beginning to wake. Emily made it halfway down the aisle before the memories began to drown her. Marcus pulling her into an empty corridor after a council meeting, his hands gentle in her hair. "You're the only real thing in this place, Em. The only thing that matters." His lips against her temple in the darkness. "I'll find a way, I promise." The way he'd stopped meeting her eyes 3 weeks ago. She could feel the pack's stares like physical weight pressing against her spine. Some faces held pity, the older wolves who remembered her father, who knew what her family had sacrificed for Ravenspire. Others showed relief, grateful it was her humiliation and not theirs. A few displayed something worse, indifference, as though watching a servant dismissed rather than a mate rejected. The pain in her chest was evolving. What had begun as a sharp, clean break was spreading through her veins like poison, burning away everything soft inside her. Every breath felt like inhaling ground glass. "You are unfit. No Luna of mine." The words echoed in her skull, and with each repetition, something else began to echo back. Something that didn't sound like grief. It sounded like rage. The torches lining the aisle flickered. Emily's steps faltered. The guards, flanking her at a respectful distance, exchanged uncertain glances but said nothing. Protocol demanded they escort the rejected mate from the hall. Protocol didn't cover what to do if she simply stopped moving. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to contain the pressure building beneath her ribs. It felt like her heart was expanding, cracking through bone, demanding more space than her body could offer. Behind her, she heard Marcus's voice, low and commanding, as he spoke to the High Council. Already moving on, already erasing her. The stone floor beneath her feet trembled. "What?" one of the guards started. The trembling intensified. A hairline crack spiderwebbed across the ancient granite, splitting the carved wolf sigil at Emily's feet perfectly in half. The torches went out. All of them, simultaneously, as though an invisible hand had snuffed their flames. Darkness crashed through the great stone hall like a living thing. Wolves gasped, their night vision activating, eyes glowing amber and gold in the sudden blackness. But Emily's eyes, when she finally looked up, were something else entirely. They burned silver-white, luminous as twin moons. Marcus's voice cut through the chaos. "Relight the torches, now." But his command lacked its usual certainty. Emily could hear it, the hairline fracture in his alpha authority. She could feel it, the way you feel a loose thread before you pull it. She turned slowly, deliberately, to face the alpha who had just destroyed her. The pressure that had been building inside her chest suddenly exploded outward. It was invisible, this force. No claws, no teeth, no physical manifestation. But it slammed through the great stone hall like a tidal wave of pure dominance. Warriors staggered as though struck by a physical blow. Several dropped to one knee without meaning to, their wolves whimpering in confusion and instinctive submission. Marcus took an involuntary step backward. His face, always so carefully controlled, flickered with something he'd never shown in public before. Fear. "Emily," he started. The banners overhead snapped violently, despite the absence of wind. Several wolves near the front dropped their gazes, unable to hold eye contact with her transformed stare. A visiting alpha from the Eastern Territories grabbed the column beside him for support, his knuckles white. Emily said nothing. She didn't need to. Her presence was speaking for her now, a language older than words, more primal than pack law. It whispered through the hall in a frequency only wolves could hear, bypassing reason and speaking directly to instinct. Bow. Submit. Kneel. "What is this?" Marcus demanded, but his voice had lost its edge. His wolf was restless, pacing behind his eyes, uncertain whether to challenge or submit to the power radiating from the woman he'd just rejected. Emily took a single step forward. Cracks spread across the floor in branching patterns, following her movement like roots seeking water. The ancient stone, laid by the pack's founders centuries ago, fractured beneath the weight of whatever was waking inside her. She could feel them all now. Every wolf in the hall, their hearts beating like drums, their wolves prowling just beneath their skin, their fear sharp and metallic on her tongue. This was what had been sleeping beneath her ordinary exterior. This was what the mate bond had kept locked away. Sealed behind a door, the rejection had just blown wide open. Lord Alistair Crow, the former High Elder, stepped out from the shadows near the dais. His weathered face held no surprise, only grim satisfaction. "Finally," he said quietly, his voice somehow carrying through the stunned silence. "The seal is broken." Marcus's head snapped toward him. "What are you talking about?" But Emily barely heard them. The power was still pouring out of her in waves, and she wouldn't stop it. For the first time in her life, she wasn't making herself small. She was taking up every inch of space she deserved. Lord Alistair Crow moved through the chaos like a man who had been waiting for this moment his entire life. He was ancient by pack standards, perhaps 70, though his eyes held centuries of knowledge. Silver hair fell past his shoulders, and he wore the deep crimson robes of a former High Elder, a position he'd resigned from under mysterious circumstances 15 years ago. Marcus's jaw clenched. "Alistair, this doesn't concern you." "Oh, but it does." Alistair's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. He stopped a respectful distance from Emily, then did something that sent shockwaves through every wolf present. He bowed, deeply. The kind of bow reserved for royalty. "Don't be a fool," Marcus snapped, his alpha command cracking through the hall. "She's nothing. A beta's daughter from a fallen house." "She," Alistair interrupted, straightening to his full height, "is Emily Carter of the moonbound bloodline, the last living descendant of the first Lunar." The words hung in the air like a sentence of execution. Murmurs erupted throughout the hall. Several council members exchanged panicked glances. The visiting alphas stepped back instinctively, their wolves recognizing something their human minds struggled to comprehend. Marcus went very still. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Alistair turned to address the crowd, his voice rising. The moonbound bloodline was thought extinct after the purge of 1847. The rival packs hunted them systematically, terrified of their power. Alphas who could command not just their own pack, but any wolf who heard their voice. Lunars who could break or forge mate bonds with a thought. Emily's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the edge of a stone column, the silver light in her eyes flickering with her confusion. "I don't," she started. "Your father knew," Alistair said gently, turning to her. "Thomas Carter wasn't just a beta. He was your guardian. When your mother died, bringing you into this world, he took an oath to hide what you were, to keep you safe until the time was right." A memory, sudden and sharp. Emily at 7 years old, sitting in her father's study. He was pressing something against her chest, a pendant that burned cold against her skin. "This will keep you safe, little moon," he whispered. "It will hide what you are until you're strong enough to bear it." "What am I, Papa?" "Something beautiful, something terrifying, something the world isn't ready for." Emily's hand moved unconsciously to her chest, where she'd worn that silver pendant for 17 years. The pendant Marcus had removed himself during their first night together, tossing it carelessly onto the nightstand. The night, everything started to change. "The seal," she whispered. Alistair nodded. "A binding created by the last surviving members of the Moonbound Council. It suppressed your power, masked your scent, made you appear ordinary. Your father paid 3 High Elders everything he had to cast it. He died believing it would last until your 30th year, when you'd be strong enough to claim your heritage safely." Marcus laughed, but it sounded hollow. "This is insane. If she had this power, why didn't she use it before? Why suffer through years of—" He stopped, seeming to realize what he was admitting. "Because the seal was designed to break under one specific circumstance," Alistair said quietly. "The severing of a true mate bond." Silence crashed through the hall. Emily felt the truth of it settling into her bones. Every strange moment of her life suddenly made sense. Why she'd always felt like a caged thing. Why her wolf had been so quiet. Why she'd never fit the mold of a normal pack member. She hadn't been broken. She'd been hidden. "No," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The council would have known. We would have sensed." "You sensed exactly what the seal allowed you to sense," Alistair cut him off. "And now?" He gestured to Emily, whose silver eyes were burning brighter. "Now she stands before you, as she truly is. Not the weak mate you could discard for political advantage, but the one wolf in this territory you should have protected above all others." The pressure in the room intensified. Several wolves dropped to their knees, unable to stand against the weight of Emily's presence. Even Marcus's elite guards were struggling to maintain their positions. Emily looked at her hands. They were glowing faintly, threads of silver light dancing beneath her skin like moonlight on water. She should have felt triumph, vindication, the satisfaction of watching Marcus realize his catastrophic mistake. Instead, she felt only a strange, cold clarity. "How long have you known?" she asked Alistair. "Since the day your father brought you to Ravenspire," he admitted. "I helped cast the seal. I've been watching over you ever since." "Then why didn't you stop this?" Her voice cracked. "Why let him—" "Because the seal could only be broken one way," Alistair said sadly. "And because you needed to see him clearly, to understand that a man who would reject you for power would never be worthy of what you truly are." Marcus took a step forward, his hand extended. "Emily, I didn't know. You have to believe me. If I'd known—" The floor cracked beneath his feet, stopping him mid-sentence. Emily's eyes met his, and for the first time in their entire relationship, she saw herself reflected in his gaze, not as she'd been, but as she was, powerful, dangerous, unmistakable. "You rejected me when you thought I was nothing," she said softly. That's all I need to know. The great stone hall trembled as ancient power, no longer sealed, no longer hidden, finally broke free. Emily didn't make a conscious decision to use her power. It simply responded to her will, the way breath responds to lungs, the way a heart responds to pain. One moment Marcus was standing, hand extended in a plea for understanding. The next, an invisible force slammed into his chest like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his boots scraping against stone. Then his knees buckled. Marcus Hale, alpha of Ravenspire Pack, dropped to the ground as though strings holding him upright had been suddenly cut. His armored knees hit the granite with a resonant clang that echoed through the silent hall. "What?" he gasped, trying to rise. He couldn't. Emily took a step toward him, and the pressure intensified. She could feel it now, the invisible threads connecting her to every wolf in the room. Marcus's thread burned brightest, pulled taut between them like a wire about to snap. She pulled. Marcus's spine bent forward against his will, his forehead nearly touching the floor. A sound escaped his throat, half growl, half whimper. His wolf, that massive, dominant beast that had ruled Ravenspire with an iron fist, was rolling over in submission inside his mind. "Emily, please." His voice cracked. "I can't. My wolf won't." "Won't what?" Emily's voice was quiet, but it carried through the hall like thunder. "Won't defy me? Won't pretend I'm beneath you?" Around them, the pack watched in stunned horror. Several wolves had collapsed to their knees in sympathy, their own wolves responding to the sheer dominance radiating from Emily. The visiting alphas pressed themselves against the walls, trying to make themselves as small as possible. This was impossible, unheard of. An alpha forced to submit in his own territory, before his own pack, by a woman he'd just rejected. Marcus's hands clawed at the stone floor, his entire body shaking with the effort of trying to rise. "The council," he managed. "They told me you were a liability, that your bloodline was too weak, that marrying you would make me appear soft. I had to choose between you and the pack's future." "You had to choose between me and your ambition," Emily corrected, her voice cutting through his excuses like a blade. "Tell the truth, Marcus. At least give me that." She moved closer, and with each step, the pressure increased. Sweat beaded on Marcus's forehead. His elite guards reached for their weapons instinctively, but Lord Alistair raised a hand, stopping them. "Touch her," Alistair warned, "and you'll be the ones on the floor." Emily crouched down, bringing herself eye level with the man who had whispered promises in the dark and destroyed her in the light. This close, she could see every micro-expression, the fear, the regret, the desperate calculation still happening behind his eyes. "Do you remember what you told me?" she asked softly. "6 months ago, in the garden behind the training grounds." Marcus's jaw clenched. He remembered. "You said I was your moon and stars," Emily continued, her voice steady despite the pain lacing every word. "You said that when you became alpha, everything would change. We'd face the council together. You'd make me your Luna no matter what they said." "I meant it." "You meant it when it was easy," she interrupted. "When it was secret. When loving me cost you nothing." She straightened, looking down at him with those burning silver eyes. "But the moment it became inconvenient, the moment choosing me meant sacrifice, you didn't hesitate. You threw me away like I was nothing." "That's not—" Marcus tried again to rise, his alpha pride warring with the supernatural force pinning him down. "If I had known what you were—" "There it is." Emily's laugh was bitter. "If you had known what I was. Not who, Not the person who loved you, who believed every lie you whispered, who would have stood beside you through anything. She shook her head. You would have kept me only because I had value. Because I could give you more power. The truth of it crashed through Marcus's face. His expression crumbled. I was afraid, he admitted, his voice breaking. The council threatened to remove me if I didn't secure a political alliance. They said you were a distraction, that I was weak for wanting you. I thought... He stopped, breathing hard. I thought I could let you go, and the pain would fade, that I could do my duty and forget. And did you? Emily asked. Did the pain fade? Marcus's answer was silence. Emily stood, towering over the alpha who had once seemed so powerful, so untouchable. Ignorance isn't innocence, Marcus. You knew I loved you. You knew this would destroy me. You chose to do it anyway. She released the pressure slightly, giving him enough freedom to lift his head. Their eyes met, silver to dark brown. Every night since, Marcus whispered, I've regretted it. Every single night. Good, Emily said simply. She turned away from him, addressing the crowd. Let this be witnessed. Your alpha chose politics over his mate, chose power over loyalty. Her voice rose. And when faced with the consequences of that choice, he kneels. Marcus remained on the floor, his armor dull in the torchlight, his wolf utterly silent within him. For the first time in Ravenspire's history, an alpha had fallen. And everyone knew who had brought him down. Marcus's voice, when he finally spoke again, had lost all its commanding edge. Emily. He was still on his knees, his hands pressed flat against the stone. Please, let me fix this. She didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge him. The pack held its collective breath. I'll declare you Luna, Marcus continued, desperation bleeding into every word. Right now, before everyone. I'll tell the council to go to hell. He stopped, swallowing hard. I'll give you everything. Co-rulership, full authority over pack decisions. Your word will be law. Several council members shifted nervously. One opened his mouth to protest, but wisely closed it when Emily's silver eyes flickered in his direction. I'll exile them if you want, Marcus pressed on, his voice rising. Every council member who pressured me, every wolf who whispered against you. I'll burn every alliance they forced me to build. The Blackthorn Treaty, the Eastern Territories, all of it, gone. Just say the word. He was offering her the world, power, vengeance, everything she might have dreamed of in those long, painful nights after he'd started avoiding her eyes. Emily finally turned. The pressure holding Marcus down eased slightly, not released, but loosened. He gasped, able to breathe fully for the first time in minutes. Hope flashed across his face like lightning. She walked toward him slowly, her teal gown whispering against the cracked stone. When she reached him, she didn't crouch down. She remained standing, looking down at the man who had once seemed so far above her. You're offering me power, she said quietly, because you're terrified of me. Marcus flinched. That's not. You're offering me a throne, she continued, because I forced you to your knees, because your wolf submitted to mine, because every wolf in this hall just watched you break. She gestured to the assembled pack. Some faces showed satisfaction at seeing their alpha humbled. Others displayed confusion, their loyalty fracturing between the leader they'd known and the force of nature standing before them. A few looked at Emily with something new in their eyes. Not pity, not indifference. Recognition. 3 days ago, Emily said, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall, I would have given anything to hear you say these words. I would have forgiven you, believed you, stood beside you, despite everything. Marcus's expression crumbled with relief. Then, "But that was when you had a choice," Emily finished. "When you could have chosen me because you loved me, not because you feared what I could do to you." She released the pressure completely. Marcus lurched to his feet, his legs shaking, his armor rattling. He reached for her hand. "Emily, I do love you. I never stopped." She stepped back, and he froze as though she'd struck him. "You love what I am now," she said. "You love my power, my bloodline, the fact that I could make you the most powerful alpha in the territory." Her voice dropped. "But you didn't love who I was. The girl who brought you coffee during late council meetings, who listened to your fears about leading the pack, who loved you when you were just Marcus, not Alpha Hale. That's not fair." "Fair?" Emily's laugh was sharp. "You rejected me in front of hundreds of wolves. You called me unfit. You destroyed a sacred bond to secure a political marriage. And now you want to talk about fair." Marcus's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "What do you want me to say? That I was wrong? I was wrong. That I was weak? I was weak. That I destroyed the best thing in my life for power I didn't even want?" His voice cracked. "I'm saying it. All of it. In front of everyone." "I know you are," Emily said gently. "But you're saying it because you have no choice. Because I'm standing here with power you can't fight. Because your wolf has already submitted to mine." She shook her head. "That's not love, Marcus. That's survival." She turned to face the pack, her voice rising with absolute clarity. "I don't want a throne built on cruelty," she declared. "I don't want loyalty given out of fear. I don't want to stand beside a man who only sees my worth when it terrifies him." She looked back at Marcus one final time. "You rejected me as your mate before this pack," she said, each word deliberate and final. "So hear my answer now, witnessed by the moon and every wolf present." The silver light around her flared, bright enough that several wolves shielded their eyes. "I reject you as my alpha." The great stone hall shook. It wasn't metaphorical. The ancient structure trembled down to its foundations, centuries-old stone groaning under the weight of a power it hadn't felt since the first Luna walked its halls. Dust rained from the ceiling. Several banners tore free from their chains, falling like wounded birds. And throughout the hall, wolves began dropping to their knees, not to Marcus, but to Emily. Not all of them, not even most, but enough. Enough that everyone understood what was happening. The pack's loyalty was fracturing, shifting, realigning itself around a new center of power. Marcus stood alone in the middle of the hall, no longer forced down by supernatural power, but brought low by something worse. The realization that everything he'd sacrificed Emily for was slipping through his fingers like water. Emily walked past him without another word. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a path to the massive oak doors. No one tried to stop her. No one dared. Lord Alistair fell into step beside her, his crimson robe sweeping the floor. "Where will you go?" he asked quietly. "Away," Emily said. "I need to think, to understand what I am without this place defining me." The doors swung open, revealing the night beyond. Moonlight poured through, silver and clean, washing away the smoke and shadows of the hall. Behind her, Marcus remained standing in the center of his fractured pack, surrounded by wolves who no longer knew who they served. Emily stepped through the doors and into the night, leaving Ravenspire Pack to decide its own fate. For the first time in her life, she was walking towards something instead of away from it. toward herself. The great stone hall emptied in chaos. Within minutes of Emily's departure, the carefully maintained hierarchy of Ravenspire Pack began to unravel like a tapestry with a single thread pulled. Wolves clustered in groups, their voices rising in heated debate. Some defended Marcus, citing his years of strong leadership and the impossible position the council had put him in. Others spoke in hushed, reverent tones about what they'd witnessed: the silver eyes, the ancient power, the way their wolves had instinctively submitted. High Elder Cornelius Blackwell, head of the council, attempted to call for order. "This changes nothing," he announced from the dais, his voice strained. "Alpha Hale remains the rightful leader of this pack. What we witnessed was what?" Lord Alistair's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "A display of power that made every wolf in this hall kneel, including your precious Alpha." Blackwell's face reddened. "The girl is clearly dangerous, unstable. This so-called bloodline is the reason any of you are alive," Alistair interrupted. He moved to the center of the hall, where Marcus still stood, statue still. "The moonbound bloodline created the pack laws you follow, established the territories you claim. Every Alpha in this room owes their authority to what Emily's ancestors built." "That was centuries ago," another council member protested. "Bloodlines fade, power dilutes." "Does she look diluted to you?" Alistair's voice dripped with contempt. He turned slowly, addressing the entire assembly. "You just watched a woman with no training, no preparation, bring your Alpha to his knees with a thought. Imagine what she'll be capable of when she learns control." The hall fell silent. Marcus finally spoke, his voice hollow. "Where did she go?" "Does it matter?" Alistair replied. "You made it clear she has no place here." "I made a mistake." "You made a choice," Alistair corrected coldly. "And now, you'll live with it." By dawn, half the council had resigned. Some fled to allied packs, fearing retribution if Emily returned with her power fully realized. Others barricaded themselves in their estates, hiring extra security. Elder Blackwell attempted to hold an emergency session, but less than half the council members appeared. Marcus was summoned to the council chambers, what remained of them, at sunrise. "The pack is in chaos," Blackwell said without preamble. "Wolves are refusing orders, questioning every decision. 3 families have already requested transfer to neighboring territories." Marcus sat in silence, still wearing his ceremonial armor from the night before. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emily's face, the moment her expression shifted from pain to power. "You need to issue a statement," Blackwell continued. "Clarify your authority. Remind the pack who leads them." "I don't lead them anymore," Marcus said quietly. "That's not." "They knelt to her, Cornelius." Marcus's hands clenched on the armrests of his chair. "My own guards. Warriors I've trained for years. They felt her presence, and their wolves submitted." He looked up, and Blackwell was startled by the emptiness in the Alpha's eyes. "I felt it too. My wolf is still cowering." Blackwell paled. An Alpha whose wolf wouldn't obey was no Alpha at all. "This is temporary," Blackwell insisted. "The shock, the surprise. Given time, your authority will reassert." "She rejected me as Alpha," Marcus interrupted. "Before the entire pack, before the moon goddess herself." He stood abruptly. "I need air." He left before Blackwell could protest. In the forests surrounding Ravenspire territory, Emily walked. She'd discarded the teal gown miles ago, shifting into her wolf form and running until her lungs burned and her paws bled. The transformation had been different this time, smoother, more natural. Her wolf, once quiet and subdued, now moved with liquid grace and terrifying power. When she finally shifted back, collapsing beside a stream as the sun rose, she found Alistair waiting. He'd brought clothes, water, and bread. "How did you find me?" she asked, pulling on the simple tunic and pants he'd laid out. "Your father taught you to run north when troubled," Alistair said. "Some habits don't change, even with power." Emily drank deeply from the water skin, then sat on a fallen log. "Tell me about the other packs." Alistair settled beside her. "There are 7 major territories within 100 miles. Ravenspire is the largest, but not the strongest. Ironmoor to the north, Shadowfen to the east, Crimson Vale to the south, each with their own alpha, their own politics." "Will they come for me?" "Some will try to court you," Alistair said. "Others will see you as a threat. The moonbound bloodline could unite the territories, or conquer them. You represent a shift in power that hasn't occurred in 200 years. Emily processed this. "What do you think I should do?" "That's not my decision to make," Alistair replied. "You could claim Ravenspire. Marcus's authority is already fractured. One word from you, and the pack would be yours. Or you could walk away, start somewhere new, build something better. Or you could do what your ancestors did," Alistair said quietly. "Unite the territories, not through conquest, but through something the packs haven't seen in generations. True leadership." Back at Ravenspire, the reckoning was beginning. Wolves gathered in the training grounds, their voices rising in organized protest. Warriors who had served Marcus loyally for years now demanded answers. Why had he hidden Emily's true nature? Why had he rejected her so publicly, so cruelly? What right did he have to lead them after his own wolf had submitted? Captain Helena Ward, Marcus's second-in-command, stepped forward. "The pack demands accountability," she announced. "We demand truth. We demand to know if the man we follow is worthy of leading us." Marcus appeared on the balcony overlooking the training grounds. He looked diminished somehow, despite his armor and alpha bearing. "You want truth?" he called down. "Here it is. I rejected my mate to secure a political alliance. I chose power over love. I was wrong." The crowd stirred, surprised by his admission. "And now?" someone shouted. Marcus's jaw clenched. "Now, I will do whatever it takes to make this right, even if that means stepping down." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Helena's voice rang out clear. "Then the pack demands a reckoning. 7 days from now, you will face judgment for your actions. And this time, we will all bear witness to whether you deserve to remain Alpha of Ravenspire." Emily spent 6 days in the wilderness, learning what it meant to be more than human, more than wolf, more than the girl who'd scrubbed floors and whispered love in the dark. Lord Alistair had led her to an ancient clearing deep in the northern woods, a place where moonlight fell like liquid silver even during the day, where the ground itself hummed with old magic. Here, he taught her what her father had meant to teach her over decades, compressed into days of grueling practice. "Control isn't suppression," Alistair explained on the second day, after Emily had accidentally shattered 3 oak trees with a burst of unfocused power. "It's direction. Your power responds to emotion, yes, but also to intention." Emily closed her eyes, breathing slowly. She could feel the threads now, invisible connections to every living thing around her. Birds in the trees, deer at the stream, wolves running through distant territories, each one a point of light in her consciousness. "Focus on one," Alistair instructed. She chose a sparrow perched on a nearby branch. Gently, she extended her awareness toward it, not commanding, but inviting. The bird cocked its head, then flew down to land on her outstretched palm, Better, Alistair said. Force creates resistance. Invitation creates loyalty. By the fourth day, Emily could shift between human and wolf form in seconds, could send her presence rippling through the forest without breaking a sweat, could command without speaking a word. But more than power, she was learning something else. She was learning who she was without Marcus Hale. On the fifth night, she sat alone by the stream, watching moonlight dance across the water. What did you lose? She asked herself. The answer came easier than expected. A dream. The fantasy of being chosen, of standing beside someone who saw her worth without her having to prove it. The comfort of being loved despite being ordinary. But that dream had been built on quicksand. Marcus had loved the version of her that made him feel powerful. The grateful, quiet girl who asked for nothing and gave everything. He'd never known the woman she could become because she'd never known it herself. What did you gain? Her reflection stared back at her from the water, silver eyes glowing softly. She'd gained truth. Power, yes, but more importantly, clarity. The seal breaking hadn't just released her abilities. It had released her from the lie she'd been living. The lie that she needed to be small to be safe. That she needed to be chosen to have value. She thought of Marcus on his knees, begging for another chance. Part of her, the part that still remembered his gentle touches in the dark, wanted to forgive him. To believe that his fear and ambition could be overcome by love. But love wasn't enough. It never had been. She didn't need Marcus to validate her. Didn't need a mate to prove she was worthy of being loved. The moon goddess had given her everything she needed the day she was born. Her father had just helped her survive long enough to claim it. On the sixth day, Alistair found her packing her few belongings. "You've made a decision," he observed. "I'm going back," Emily said, rolling up the spare clothes he'd brought her. "To reclaim your place as Luna." "No." She secured the pack and stood, facing her mentor. "To give Ravenspire what it actually needs." "Which is?" "A future that isn't built on fear and political marriages," Emily said. "A pack where strength doesn't mean cruelty, where loyalty isn't bought with threats and alliances." She looked toward the south, where Ravenspire's territory began. "My ancestors created the pack laws. Maybe it's time someone from that bloodline reminded everyone what those laws were meant to protect." Alistair's weathered face broke into a smile. "Your father would be proud." "My father sacrificed everything to keep me safe," Emily said quietly. "The least I can do is make that sacrifice mean something." She shifted into her wolf form, larger now, silver-white with eyes that glowed like twin moons. Alistair watched as she stretched, testing her muscles, preparing for the run back. "What will you do about Marcus?" he asked. Emily shifted back long enough to answer. "Whatever serves the pack. Not my hurt feelings, not his guilt. The pack." She shifted again and began running south. The journey that had taken her a full night of panicked running took 3 hours of purposeful travel. She moved through the forest like liquid moonlight, wolves in surrounding territories lifting their heads as she passed, sensing something ancient moving through their lands. As the sun began to set on the 7th day, Emily crested the final hill overlooking Ravenspire territory. The great stone hall rose in the distance, torches already being lit for the evening. She could feel the pack's presence. Hundreds of wolves gathered in the training grounds, their emotions a tangled web of anxiety, anticipation, and hope. They were waiting for something. Someone. Emily took a breath, letting the cool evening air fill her lungs. She thought of the girl who'd walked down that aisle 6 days ago, heartbroken, humiliated, believing she was nothing. That girl was gone. In her place stood something the world hadn't seen in 2 centuries, a true alpha of the moonbound bloodline, walking toward her destiny not out of revenge or ambition, but out of something far more dangerous: choice. She began her descent toward Ravenspire, each step deliberate and sure. The moon rose behind her, full and bright, casting her shadow long across the valley below. Tomorrow, Marcus would face his reckoning. Tonight, Emily Carter would decide what that reckoning meant. Not as a rejected mate seeking vengeance, but as a leader who understood that true power wasn't about making others kneel. It was about giving them a reason to stand. The training grounds of Ravenspire had never held so many wolves. Every member of the pack, from the highest-ranking warriors to the kitchen staff, had gathered in concentric circles around the central platform. Torches burned in iron braziers, casting dancing shadows across hundreds of faces. The air hummed with tension, with anticipation, with the weight of history being made. Marcus stood alone on the platform, no longer in his ceremonial armor. He wore simple leather and linen, the clothes of a common wolf. His face was haggard, carved with exhaustion and something deeper: acceptance. Captain Helena Ward stepped forward, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. 7 days ago, Alpha Marcus Hale rejected his fated mate before this pack. In doing so, he revealed truths long hidden and fractured the trust between leader and led. She paused. Tonight, we gather to render judgment. Does he remain Alpha of Ravenspire, or does his failure demand consequence? The crowd murmured, wolves exchanging glances. Before we proceed, Helena continued, there is one voice that must be heard. She turned toward the edge of the crowd, where the throng was beginning to part. Emily walked through the opening pathway, her silver eyes glowing softly in the torchlight. She wore not a gown, but a warrior's tunic in deep gray, her chestnut hair loose around her shoulders. She moved with purpose, with grace, with the kind of quiet authority that needed no announcement. Wolves dropped to one knee as she passed, not from compulsion this time, but from respect. Marcus's breath caught when he saw her. His hand moved instinctively toward his chest, as if reaching for a bond that was no longer there. Emily climbed the platform steps, but she didn't look at Marcus. Not yet. She turned to face the assembled pack. I am Emily Carter, she said, her voice clear and strong, daughter of Thomas Carter, last of the moonbound bloodline. And I am here not to claim what was taken from me, but to give back what Ravenspire has lost. The crowd leaned forward, hanging on every word. For too long. This pack has been ruled by fear, Emily continued. Fear of appearing weak, fear of losing alliances, fear of choosing heart over politics. She finally turned to Marcus. And that fear created a leader who sacrificed love for power, and lost both. Marcus flinched but held her gaze. I won't lie to you, Emily said, addressing everyone again. What Marcus did hurt me, broke me, but it also freed me, showed me that I was never weak. I was just hidden. She paused. The question you're here to answer tonight isn't whether he hurt me. It's whether he can still lead you. She stepped aside, giving Marcus the floor. He stood slowly, facing his pack with empty hands. I failed you, Marcus said simply. Not just Emily. All of you. His voice was rough but steady. I let the council tell me that alliances mattered more than integrity. That strength meant hiding vulnerability, that a good leader sacrifices everything, including his soul, for the pack's benefit. Several council members shifted uncomfortably in the crowd. But true strength, Marcus continued, isn't about domination. It's about knowing when to admit you're wrong, when to step aside, when to let someone better lead. He turned to Emily. I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't deserve a second chance. But this pack deserves better than a broken alpha who can't trust his own heart. Elder Blackwell pushed forward from the crowd. This is unnecessary dramatics. One mistake doesn't erase years of strong leadership. One mistake? Emily's voice cut through the air like a blade. She descended the platform, walking directly to Blackwell. Tell them about the council meetings. The ones where you pressured Marcus to reject me, where you threatened to remove him if he didn't secure the Blackthorn alliance. Blackwell's face went pale. Tell them, Emily pressed, how you've been manipulating alpha decisions for 15 years. Since my father refused to let you experiment with moonbound artifacts you claimed didn't exist. The crowd erupted in angry murmurs. That's a lie. Is it? Lord Alistair stepped forward, holding a leather-bound journal. Because Thomas Carter kept meticulous records of every conversation, every threat, every attempt to undermine him. He opened the book. Shall I read them aloud? Blackwell looked wildly between Emily and Alistair, then bolted. He made it 3 steps before Captain Helena's hand clamped down on his shoulder. You'll stay for the full accounting, she said coldly. Emily returned to the platform, but this time she stood beside Marcus, not opposite him. Your alpha made a terrible choice, she told the pack. But he made it under impossible pressure from wolves who valued gold over goodness. That doesn't excuse what he did, but it explains it. She raised her voice. I call for the immediate removal of Elders Cornelius Blackwell, Magnus Thorne, and Victoria Sterling from the High Council for corruption and manipulation of Alpha authority. The crowd roared approval. And I call for Marcus Hale to step down as Alpha, Emily continued. Silence crashed through the training grounds. Marcus's shoulders sagged, but he nodded. I accept. Not as punishment, Emily interrupted, but as evolution. This pack needs new leadership, a council that serves wolves, not politics, laws that protect the vulnerable, not just the powerful. She turned to Captain Helena. I name Helena Ward as Transitional Alpha until a proper election can be held, one where every wolf, regardless of rank, has a voice. Helena's eyes widened. Emily, You've served with honor, led with integrity, and you've never sacrificed your principles for convenience. Emily smiled. You're exactly what Ravenspire needs. The pack erupted in cheers. Emily finally turned to Marcus, and for the first time since entering the grounds, she truly looked at him. Not with anger or pain, but with something quieter, understanding. I forgive you, she said softly, meant only for him. Marcus's eyes filled. Emily, not because you deserve it, she continued, but because I deserve peace, and I can't carry this anger into whatever comes next. What comes next? He asked hoarsely. For you? Redemption, if you choose it. Rebuild yourself. Learn what it means to lead with heart instead of fear. She stepped back. For me, something bigger than Ravenspire. The other packs need to see what real leadership looks like. She descended the platform for the final time. Marcus watched her go. This woman he'd thrown away, now walking toward a destiny he could only imagine. I loved you, he called after her. I still... Emily stopped, looked back with those luminous silver eyes. "I know," she said gently, "but love isn't enough when it comes too late." She walked into the crowd, wolves parting and then closing around her, protecting her, celebrating her. And above them all, the full moon watched as Ravenspire Pack, fractured, bloodied, but finally honest, began the work of becoming something new, something better. Something worthy of the wolves who called it home. 3 months later, Ravenspire had learned to breathe again. The changes came slowly at first, then all at once, like spring thaw after a brutal winter. Alpha Helena Ward's first act was to dismantle the High Council's stranglehold on pack decisions, replacing it with a representative assembly where even the lowest-ranked wolves had voices. Kitchen staff sat beside warriors. Healers debated with strategists. Decisions were made not by who held the most power, but by what served the pack best. The great stone hall, once a place of intimidation and judgment, had been transformed into a gathering space. The oppressive banners were replaced with woven tapestries depicting pack history, not just the victories, but the failures too. Honesty, Helena insisted, was the foundation of trust. Trade agreements were renegotiated based on mutual benefit rather than domination. The Blackthorn alliance, built on Marcus's intended marriage, was dissolved and rebuilt as an equal partnership. Neighboring packs watched with cautious interest as Ravenspire proved that strength didn't require cruelty. And in a small cabin on the northern edge of the territory, Marcus Hale learned what it meant to be ordinary. He woke before dawn, not to attend council meetings, but to chop firewood for the elderly wolves who couldn't manage it themselves. He worked in the training grounds, not as alpha, but as an instructor, teaching young wolves the difference between dominance and leadership. He ate in the communal hall, sitting not at the head table, but among the pack, listening more than speaking. Some wolves still resented him, others pitied him. But slowly, grudgingly, a few began to respect the man he was becoming. Not the alpha he'd been, but the wolf who was learning that redemption was built through consistent action, not grand gestures. He never stopped thinking about Emily, but he'd learned to live with the weight of what he'd lost, carrying it not as a burden, but as a reminder. Love given too late is not love at all. It's regret dressed in desperate clothes. Emily, meanwhile, had become something unprecedented. She traveled between the 7 major territories, belonging to none but welcomed by all. She mediated disputes that had festered for generations, her presence alone enough to quiet the most volatile conflicts. When 2 packs nearly went to war over boundary disputes, she walked the contested land with representatives from both sides and helped them see not borders, but opportunities for cooperation. She wore no crown, carried no title. But everywhere she went, wolves recognized what she was. Not a conqueror seeking to dominate, but a force seeking to unite. Lord Alistair had accompanied her for the first month, teaching her the intricacies of interpack politics, introducing her to alphas who remembered the moonbound bloodline with reverence or fear. But eventually, even he stepped back. "You don't need me anymore," he'd said with pride. "Perhaps you never did. I needed you to believe in me when I didn't believe in myself," Emily had replied. "That's everything." Now, on a crisp autumn evening, Emily stood alone on a cliff overlooking the valley where 3 territories converged. The moon hung full and bright overhead, painting the landscape in silver and shadow. Below, she could see the lights of Ravenspire to the south, Ironmaw to the north, Shadowfen to the east. 3 packs that had been rivals for decades, now tentatively building bridges instead of walls. She breathed deeply, letting the cool air fill her lungs. The power that had broken free months ago no longer raged inside her. It flowed, steady and controlled, a river instead of a flood. She'd learned to carry it not as a weapon, but as a responsibility. Her wolf stirred contentedly in the back of her mind, no longer caged or silenced, but finally at peace. Emily thought about the girl she'd been. The one who'd believed her worth was determined by whether someone chose to love her. That girl had spent years making herself small, apologizing for existing, grateful for scraps of affection given in secret and denied in public. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood that true power wasn't about making others kneel. It wasn't about revenge or domination or proving your worth to people who refused to see it. True power was knowing your value didn't depend on anyone's recognition. True power was choosing yourself first and the world second. True power was walking away from love offered too late, because you'd learned that real love, the kind worth having, never required you to beg for it. A sound behind her made Emily turn. A young wolf from Shadowfen approached cautiously, a message tied to her wrist. "Alpha Cassian requests your presence at the Territorial Summit next week," the messenger said. "He says the packs need a neutral voice to chair the negotiations." Emily smiled. "Tell him I'll be there." The messenger bowed, not out of fear, but respect, and departed. Emily turned back to the view, to the moonlight spilling across 3 territories, learning to coexist, to the future she was helping build, not through force, but through presence. She thought briefly of Marcus, wondered if he was looking at the same moon, carrying the same regrets. Part of her hoped he'd found peace. A smaller part, the one that still remembered how his laugh sounded in the dark, hoped he hadn't forgotten the cost of his choices. But mostly, she hoped for herself. For the life she was building, not as someone's mate or someone's Luna, but as Emily Carter, daughter of a guardian, heir to an ancient bloodline, and a woman who'd learned that being chosen was nothing compared to choosing yourself. The moon reached its zenith, and Emily closed her eyes, feeling its light wash over her like a blessing. She'd been rejected before her pack, humiliated before hundreds, broken by the man she'd loved. And from those ashes, she'd become something the world hadn't seen in centuries. Not a queen with a crown, but a force that needed no throne to reshape the world. Above her, the moon goddess watched her descendant stand tall and unbroken. And if the moon seemed to shine just a little brighter over that particular cliff, well, some blessings don't need witnesses to be real. The end. True power is knowing your worth without needing anyone to confirm it. Real love never asks you to shrink yourself to fit someone else's fear. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear which moment hit hardest in the comments below. Your voice shapes what stories I tell next, because the best tales are the ones we create together.